Black time on the corner, hoping for some rain. That look like it's hoping for some rain. And I see the robins perched in barren treetops.
Winter in America by Gil Scott-Heron. Gil Scott-Heron, who's pulled out of a concert in Israel, refusing to sing there now because of what's happening with the Palestinians. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We're broadcasting on over 800 stations on Pacifica and NPR and low-power FM and college and community radio stations, on public access TV and PBS TV stations, and both TV satellite networks, Dish Network, Channel 9415, Free Speech TV, 9410 Link TV, and on Direct TV, Channel 375. And we're video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. Our headlines are also available in Spanish for any radio station to take as over 250 are. I'm Amy Goodman. We're looking at what's called Mini Super Tuesday. Around the country, the incumbents are in big trouble. We've just talked about Pennsylvania. I want to turn to Arkansas right now. Our guests in studio are Katrina vanden Heuvel. She's editor of The Nation magazine, and the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Alexis Simendinger is with us in Washington, D.C., a reporter at the National Journal. Alexis, you've been following Arkansas.
Exactly. I spent some time earlier this month tracking Senator Lincoln and her challenger in the Democratic primary, Lieutenant Governor Bill Halter, around Arkansas. And it was a very, very interesting race that Senator Lincoln knew she was in trouble with because of the big money coming from organized labor and MoveOn.org and others in her state to support, actually to recruit and support a challenger in the Democratic primary in a state that is increasingly conservative, went overwhelmingly for John McCain in the presidential election. And Senator Lincoln has tried, some would say very awkwardly, to be a centrist in her state with a centrist voting record, and she was clobbered over her what they called flip-flopping record on health care, voting in separate votes in the end of 2009 and early 2010 in different ways. So she was condemned for abandoning a public option, insurance option. She originally was supportive of the Employee Free Choice Act, the card check initiative that organized labor is very supportive of, and then she went against it. So Bill Halter swooped in and gave her a run for her money and is now forcing her into the June 8th runoff, which she had been hoping to avoid. So she looks weakened. She had to spend an enormous sum of money to try to combat the outside money that he was raising and spending. And of course, in a conservative state, it doesn't look that terrific for her in November.
Why was she known as Walmart's senator? Why was Blanche Lincoln seen in that way in Arkansas, Alexis?
She's has a record of being very supportive of the Walmart owners, the corporate entity that supports Walmart, Sam Walton, and she's been very reluctant to weigh in more decisively to be supportive of the employees of a enormous business enterprise in her state. She's been much more allied with the corporate ownership and their interests against the employees and their interests in organizing.
Katrina vanden Heuvel, your take on Arkansas right now and what this means, she's forced into a runoff now.
I think it's a very important test for progressives to organize in a conservative state and try in a primary to change the balance of forces, even if Bill Halter, who's no lefty insurgent, but does pose a challenge to Blanche Lincoln and her corporate conservative democratic policies. I think it's a test. I do think what happened is that Blanche Lincoln became a kind of reborn populist, fighting for a tougher derivatives to curb these speculative instruments. So I think there's a value in that, and I think we need primaries across this country to change the constellation of forces inside the Democratic Party. I don't think this is necessarily a left-right issue. I think it's about working people versus Wall Street, the banks, corporate interests, the Walmarts of the world. And in that sense, this becomes a kind of interesting petri dish, Arkansas, and a state which needs better representation for its working people.
It's interesting you mentioned the derivatives, because earlier in the headlines saying Senate Banking Committee Chair Christopher Dodd's proposing to weaken the provision on derivatives trading in the financial regulation bill he unveiled. Under the current proposal, Wall Street firms would be banned from acting as brokers for most forms of derivatives trades, but Dodd's calling for suspending the ban for 2 years and allowing the U.S. Treasury to cancel it altogether. And this race was really putting her in a box, forcing her to
be tougher, tougher, and to show a little bit of populist backbone. I will say people in Washington expected Dodd Tuesday night, sort of in the dead of the primary night, to skewer the possibility of tougher reform. I don't know how that plays going forward, but it may well help Bill Halter in a runoff, because she'll be in a box as to what to say about the establishment Democratic Party's move.
Reverend
That's
Jackson.
a larger Democratic identity crisis. Roosevelt had a point of view. These banks are too big, and we should separate them, except trading from lending, put America back to work, chicken in every pot, a foreclosure moratorium. It's like if I win, you win. Now, I may win and you may not win. That's a disconnect. And even all the Wall Street maneuvering, what is so bad about this, that we have bailed out Wall Street, but disconnected from lending up reinvestment. And that seems that Dodd is making another fateful step backwards, giving Wall Street more and giving 25 million people unemployed less. It seemed, again, Blanche was also caught in seen as kind of flip-flopping and kind of a unprincipled position. Arkansas is too poor to be forced to vote rich. If you run an Arkansas campaign on Arkansas's interest, you may prevail and deserve to win.
I just want to go back to Alexis for a minute, because I know you're going to have to leave. This runoff, what's different? I mean, you have D.C. Morrison, who won't be in the runoff. Where will his votes go? Because this is so tight.
You know, when I was in Arkansas, it was interesting. The voters that I talked to, Arkansas has early voting, and they started to vote on May 3rd. So when I was there, I actually could talk to voters who were walking into polling places very early. And what they were telling me is that D.C. Morrison, a very conservative businessman with very little funding, very little understanding about what he stood for, was the spoiler, the protest vote. The voters that I talked to were saying that they were trying to send a message to both Senator Lincoln and to Lieutenant Governor Halter, saying that they were in some ways very disenchanted with both of them and very upset about their negative advertising, bashing each other over a variety of things that some voters told me they just found to be kind of hyperbole on both sides, so pox on both of them. So I would imagine that either those voters stand down now going into June, or without D.C. Morrison there, or that they will make a decision one way or the other. I actually talked to some voters who said that they hoped that Blanche would get a message. That was the phrase that I heard. I'm sending Blanche a message. I also wanted to add something about this derivatives, which is very interesting. As you know, the Senate, with Senator Dodd, held back from moving ahead on the portion of the legislation that Blanche Lincoln had allied herself with on the derivatives. Now, as you pointed out, Senator Dodd is about to move ahead and weaken it. So this has turned out to not be a very helpful, as you point out, to her for this primary, since she now has to extend herself into June. But the one thing I want to point out is when I was talking to voters, they were not focused on this. She had hoped that her chairmanship of the Senate Ag Committee would really help her make a case in the state to show that she was a populist. The voters that I spoke with were much, much more focused on her record on health care, and I did not hear anyone talking to me about the banks.
Here's a sampling of what's been on the airwaves in Arkansas in recent weeks.
My daughter Casey has special needs. She faces a lot of health problems, so I worry about health insurance. That's why I'm so upset that Senator Blanche Lincoln voted to allow health insurance companies to deny coverage to people with pre-existing conditions. I guess Blanche Lincoln sided with the big insurance companies because they could afford big campaign contributions. We need a senator that's going to truly stand up for what the working people need.
SEIU COPE is responsible for the content of this advertising.
I'm Blanche Lincoln, and I approve this message. If you listen to Bill Halter in his TV ad, you'll notice he never denies outsourcing American jobs to India. Just like he won't tell us what he promised the AFL-CIO, or how he would have voted on the public option, or on the Wall Street bailout. And when asked about his company being sued for cheating investors, he responds with lawyer language.
The lawsuit was settled. The company never admitted to those allegations.
There you have it, the ads on both sides. Reverend Jackson.
Well, you know, we ended up supporting the health care bill that surfaced, but not the one that we fought for. The result is that today the insurance companies, there is no check and balance on. Insurance companies are still going out the roof. $2,000 a night for hotel beds. You can buy a medicine in Canada for $200 and on the Michigan side for $1,400. Public option really didn't matter to a lot of people. And there's another case where the health bill was a bold step in the right direction. But giving up public option was a lot. And again, in Arkansas, you have a case of a lot of working poor people who now watch Wall Street